on, everybody? Welcome back to Patriot Specialized, part 2 of this week's little shenanigans video. Been a pretty crazy week, and on the last couple videos I had talked about some permit issues that I've had over this week that I thought was worth covering. I never mentioned what they were, but I mentioned I was going to talk about them a couple times, so that's what I'm about to do. Stick around.
Right across these plains and prairies, Rocky Mountain highs, fade off into the distance like ghost riders in the sky. Black smoke and white line, steel horses side by side. It's more than just a living, y'all. Hell, it's our way of life. We're the last of the cowboys, the giddy up gone boys. 18 wheels on the concrete, it's a slow and dying breed, rolling like Jesse James, modern day outlaw game. If you're out here riding with me, come on back and make some noise. We're the last of the cowboys. It's a family tradition, diesel's running through our veins. Our daddy showed us the roads, we were born in the fast lane. Branded by our heroes, taught to saddle up and move. We keep this country rolling, we're damn proud of what we do. We're the last of the cowboys, the giddy up gone boys. 18 wheels on the concrete, it's a slow and dying breed, rolling like Jesse James, modern day outlaw game. If you're out here riding with me, come on back and make some noise. We're the last of the cowboys. Third time generation, a little old school salvation. Blazing trails across this nation, from sea to shining sea. We're the last, we're the last, we're the last of the cowboys.
Boy, man, trucking through wonderful, wild and wonderful West Virginia, I think they say. These hills are giving me a little bit of a fight. Started out in Columbia, South Carolina. That's where I stayed at last night. I started out down there this morning. Trucked through some smoke, thanks to Canada. The little situation they got going on up there. And looks pretty good now. I think it's moved out. Pretty good trucking. Now I'm just fighting with the hills, trying to keep this thing moving. We're doing a whopping 38 mile an hour right now. Pulling this excavator up to Belle Vernon, Pennsylvania. So on the preview, I mentioned that in the last episode, part 1, I talked about, I mentioned that I had some permit issues this week that were interesting and worth talking about. Right off the bat, the wheel loader that I picked up in Fort Drum, New York, that went down to Albany, Georgia, the dimensions that they gave us on that were 12'4" tall. 12'4" on my trailer with an 18-inch deck height puts you at 1310. So we went ahead and permitted for 1311 on that and give a little bit of padding, because this is where it gets interesting. New York is probably the shortest state I've ever seen for the requirements for a pull car. I don't know if anybody's shorter than. They require a pull car and a route survey at 14 foot. So you really want to avoid being 14 foot or higher. Anything exceeding 14 foot is the way the law reads. So 14 foot quarter inch, and you're going to need a pull car and a route survey done to haul the load. So that made that load a little bit tough. I I got there, we permitted for 1311. I only had her order, and this is an important thing, pay attention to. I only had my permit office order the New York permit for 1311. Didn't order any other permits until I got there and got accurate dimensions that I took myself on the trailer, overall dimensions. So turned out on that load we were actually a little bit shorter than, or not quite as wide as what they said it was. I think they measured the bucket before they took it off, which would have been a considerable amount wider than the loader itself. We ended up about a foot skinnier on width, but when I got that thing on the trailer, got rehooked to it and got my air built up, we were sitting at 14 foot 4 inches tall. As I just said, that's an issue in New York. So what I did there to get around it is I went ahead and ordered the rest of my permits, because none of the states going down to Georgia after New York require a pull card until 14.5. Most of them were 14.6. There was one that was 14.5. So we had no issue with needing a pull card in any other state. So I went ahead and ordered those. Went ahead and just said order those permits for 14.4. I'll put it back to that height when I get down to Pennsylvania. So I adjusted my ride height on the truck and trailer, which gets a little tricky, and you don't really want to do that if you're going any sort of long distance. But I really didn't have a ton of mileage to get out of New York, so I went ahead and adjusted the ride height. And there was a couple things that I pulled really hard down on the suspension, put some chains over top of it, and pulled straight down on the suspension on that thing. Managed to get it down to right at 14 feet, where I was comfortable. It might have been a quarter inch, half inch over 14 feet, but I was comfortable enough calling it 14 foot at that point that we went ahead and rolled. Got down to the Pennsylvania border, pulled over, put everything back to ride height, took those extra chains off that were pulling down on the suspension, because you don't want to leave that much pressure on a suspension on any vehicle, whether it's a car or a pickup truck or a semi-truck or anything you're hauling. You don't really want to leave that much downward pressure on the suspension. It could damage it going down the road. So I took that off, and it was pretty crazy, because I said, I'm go ahead and go, like, I think I'm close enough. And you know, none of the scales were open, so on the way up, so I think I'm pretty safe. And right off the bat, I got on to 81 coming out of Fort Drum, heading south. The very first rest area, they have an inspection station there. They were open. There was 5 DOT officers in there. All 4 of them weren't doing anything. 1 was busy with the truck. 4 of them were just standing there talking. They looked at me, and I thought, oh man, here we go. Like, this is it right here. And they ended up waving me through and didn't even ask to see my permit. So I couldn't get out of that rest area fast enough, but I got out of there, got down to the PA state line, got everything back to ride height, everything the way it should be. And we were sitting at 14.3 and a half after I got everything back where it should. So for 14.4 covered it, went ahead and ran the rest of the way. So that, the lesson that the thing I wanted to talk about there, and the lesson that is in that little story, is that don't necessarily order all of your permits until you get there and get accurate dimensions yourself. What was happening there was those guys were pulling dimensions off the internet. They weren't grabbing a tape measure and going out and measuring the load. They were pulling it off the internet, and that happens a lot with freight brokers and even some agents. They're just not there on site, so they can't. There's no way for them to verify that things are a certain height. There's no way for them to physically go out and put a tape measure on it. If their customer doesn't do it, or isn't willing to do it, or whatever, then all they have to go on is internet numbers. So smart trucking will tell you that you want to just order the first permit, maybe the first 2 if you're only in one state for a short period of time. You don't think you'll have time to get the rest of the permits and still be able to keep moving. You may want to order the first 2 permits, but in this case, there was enough time there that I knew we could get the Pennsylvania permit pretty fast. So we went ahead and once I knew the dimensions, I called them into my permit office, and she ordered them. So that was that. And then the South Carolina permit was just dragging its feet. Like, I got all the other permits real fast, and we just sat there and waited for the South Carolina. And amazingly, we ended up getting that permit about 20 minutes before I needed it. I was about 19 miles away from South Carolina when we got the South Carolina permit. So that was lucky for us that we got it. Otherwise, I'd have been sitting there at the border waiting. Lucky for us, we got it. That was almost dead on a 24-hour turnaround to get that permit. So keep that in mind. In some of these states, there's some turnaround on these permits. Right now, Tennessee is tough. They're out pretty far. They're taking a lot of time to get a permit back. South Carolina is always that way. That's not new. That's just, they take, you know, they take a little bit. So the solution for me, and something you might want to do if you're through South Carolina a lot, a South Carolina permit itself generally costs, just to order the permit, I don't know if you use a permit service or whatever, there's other fees involved, but just to order the permit, generally a normal, not crazy dimension permit, normally they're like 30 bucks to get the permit. Now, an annual South Carolina permit, which covers you for a year, they give you like 4 maps. They tell you what routes you're allowed on, what routes you're not allowed on. They give you certain dimensions. You're allowed up to those dimensions. In my case, they gave me 14-foot wide, which surprised me that they would give me that wide on an annual permit. But they gave me 14-foot wide legal height. They would not let me go over height at all. And I guess that's the max that they'll do. They won't give you an annual permit for over height. And then they gave me 100-foot long. So if I had a stretch trailer, I could stretch out a little bit and still be covered under that blanket permit. And then they gave me 100,000 pounds gross. That's a little low for what I do a lot of times, but it also fits in the category of a lot of things I do. So that's the perimeters they gave me on my annual. The annual permit cost $100. So if you're through South Carolina, or you think you're going to be through South Carolina 4 times in 1 year, that permit's going to pay for itself to have the annual, and you don't have to worry about that. You don't have to worry about the time frame on the South Carolina permits. Worry about them taking a while to get there. So that's what we do with South Carolina. That was a big one that I want to say. You might want to consider that if you're through South Carolina a lot, or you just don't want to worry about the time frame when you do get a load going through South Carolina. You're willing to give up the $100. It's $100 to order that permit, and those perimeters that I just gave you are probably what you're going to get maxed out. Like that's the most they're going to give you. So something to keep in mind. Pretty important information. It certainly would have, if I'd have done that a long time ago, then I wouldn't have been stressing out about that South Carolina permit and literally getting it the last minute. Some of the routing that I ran into was also interesting. It really helps. It really helps if you have a GPS. I'm fortunate. I bought this Garmin 785. It's a Dieselcam 785 GPS. It allows me to put my permit. You saw on one of my, if you watched all my videos, you saw on one of them where I was putting a permit route into my GPS, and that allows me to do that. And that really makes a big difference for not missing a permit route, because if you miss one and you're on a 14-foot 4-inch height, if, for example, this could happen regardless, but there was a truck stop that I wanted to get to. I was coming down. Time-wise, it left me with like 10 or 15 minutes to spare to get to this one truck stop in exit 11 on Route 20. And it was just a little truck stop. Looking at stopping there for the night, and I got off the exit right there to go to it, and between me and the truck stop was the highway, and the highway went over top of the road that I was exiting to, and the bridge that was there was marked 14-foot 2 inches. So that's a problem. There's nothing I could do with that. So I ended up getting back on the highway and going to the very next exit, which was exit 18, and that one, there was a truck stop there that I had no trouble with getting in there. So it's a couple of things that, interesting stuff about permits that I wanted to talk about, things you should know. Permits are tricky. Like, it's just, permit loads are tricky. Also, this load here, I'm kind of in a time crunch. Just like always, seems like I live my life under some kind, like I wouldn't be happy if I wasn't under some sort of pressure to get a load delivered. this load here, because of the holiday coming up on the 4th of July, there's curfews that are put in place on Monday, that start on Monday. Normally that starts on a Friday before a holiday, because holidays are usually falls on a Friday or a Monday. They normally fall the day before the weekend. This case, because the holiday's on a Tuesday, they waited until Monday to start the holiday restriction. So if I was to not deliver this load today and wait till Monday, I would have to make sure I was at my delivery before noon on Monday, or I would have been subject to a violation for traveling during restricted hours. Probably wouldn't have been an issue for me, but again, I talked about on part 1 where I live north of what turned out to be about 2.5 hours north. I thought it was about 1.5 hours, but about 2.5 hours north of Bell Vernon. So this just makes more sense for me just to kick it off on the way through. And I think I'm going to make it. They're open till 4. I talked to them. They're standardly open till 4. I don't think it'll be an issue for me to get there by then. Right now, GPS is telling me I'll be there about 3 o'clock. So now, that brings me to another subject. If your company qualifies, and there's a few qualifying factors, you have to look them up. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but there is a few qualifying factors that are involved here, and your company CSA score is one of them. And not the score itself, but their status, I think it is. If your company qualifies and you're on an over-dimensional load, you are subject to the half-hour break exemption. So over-dimensional load, that the company meets the qualifications and the driver meets qualifications, you do not have to take you are exempt from taking a 30-minute break. Today, that means everything to me. Normally in summertime, you run out of daylight long before you run out of log hours long before you run out of daylight. In the winter, that 30-hour exemption gets used a lot because the time frames are so short that you don't have enough daylight to run your full logbook out. So stopping and taking that break is a big deal in the winter. It could cause you to lose an hour's worth of travel for doing it. But in the summer, it's not so much. Like right now, daylight is there's such a long period of daylight that you run out of log hours long before you run out of daylight. However, in my case, today, I'm going to use that exemption, which I don't normally. I think I've only used it one other time. I don't normally use it, but today it's the difference between delivering and not delivering. If I stop and take a break today, I'm not going to get there until after they close. So something else to keep in mind with the pulling over dimensional loads, if your company qualifies, you have to check into it and find out if you and your company qualify. But if you qualify for it, then you are exempt from taking the 30-minute break. Now, the way our company does it, I was told that it's still going to show up red on your logbook, it's still going to show as a violation on your logbook, but in the comments you put in the permit number or the order number that you're on, so that if we're audited or if the DOT wants to look it up, they can look up the permit off the permit number, and that will verify that you were under an over-dimensional load on that day, just in case they inspect you 5, 6, 7 days later. They can verify that you were under a permitted load that day. So some things to keep in mind. That's all I got. We're going to see how this works out. I'm going to shoot some more footage today. We'll see if I make it to my delivery, and then once I get out of my delivery, we'll see if I make it home. It's a tough nut to crack today. The pressure is on. I don't have minutes to spare here to get both of these done. Like, it's right on the max I can do. So we're gonna see. One little holdup might mess this whole program up. So we're gonna see what happens. Stay tuned. I'm gonna do a little more filming once I get to delivery, and then we'll see if I make it home. Hope everybody has a great day.
Raised a lot of hell back wild days. Yeah, wild days. Life was just one big joke. My head fogged up from the beer and the smoke. In my wild days, couldn't see through the haze. We had a lot of good times and some bad times too. Like when I lost my best friend Tommy, Lord, I wish he'd have made it through wild days. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. You know, never seemed quite the same without him there with us in our wild days. I guess you never know just when your time might come. You know, we didn't think about it much back then when we were young and in our wild days. 'Cause when we were young, we didn't have a care. Our parents said we didn't have a prayer. We was hanging out, living it up, raising all kinds of hell. Pushing our love, we was shooting stars out one by one till the early morning light dawned on a wild day. Yeah, another wild day. Wild day. Seems like a dream. I was hellbound, just turned 18 in my wild days. Racing my car on the Mobac roads. I had Leonard Skinner on my radio in my wild days. Headed sideways. My mama always told me, son, I'll be praying for you. And I know somehow the man upstairs, he's gonna get you through your wild days. And he sure did. 'Cause when we were young, we didn't have a care. Our parents said we didn't have a prayer. We was hanging out, living it up, raising all kinds of hell. Pushing our love, and we was shooting stars out one by one till the early morning light dawned on a wild day. Yeah, another wild day. We were young, we didn't have a care. Our parents said we didn't have a prayer. We was hanging out, living it up, raising all kinds of hell, pushing the love. We was shooting stars out one by one till the early morning light dawned on a wild day. In my younger days, they were wild days.
Man, it is humid today.